In today's video, Eliza Clark's sophomore novel is a chilling true crime drama. Melissa Broder is looking for meaning inside a cactus. Human trafficking and motherhood are explored in Jacinta Townsend's Mother Country. Elizabeth Gaskell's unfinished novel, Louisa Reid's feminist novel The Poet, Etaf Rum's Evil Eye, and the best book I've read this year. Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome back to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, a channel where I discuss literary fiction, new releases, and global literature. This is a regular series of mine where I review the last 10 books I've finished and anything else I've given up on in that time. So if that's your thing and you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Now, I've only got one book to tell you about that I didn't finish today, and that is The Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. This is a dystopian with underexplored themes and poor character drawing. I think C. Pam Zhang has struggled with not knowing if she wanted to write a more literary dystopian novel or a more fun, entertaining style dystopian novel, and has tried to do a little bit of both and has fallen in the middle and failed to do either. Dystopians either talk about power and control, or they reflect the world we live in back at us in a way that demonstrates an injustice. The Land of Milk and Honey does both of these things. There are discussions around consumerism, endangered species, environmentalism, and what is left for the next generation. I just feel like it wasn't saying anything new or unique on any of these topics. I was bored. Before I get into the books I've finished, I just want to thank my wonderful Patreons and special mention to Karen and Megan who have signed up in the last month. And we've made a little bit of a change to the Patreon. We've gone from one book club a month to two, one of which is focusing on translated literature. So there's more choice for our Patreons on what they can participate in. If you'd like to sign up and read some books with me, get your name on this wonderful animation, I would love your support. On to the books I've finished. Fayne and Emery McDonald. Normally I review these books from worst to best, and for the rest of this video that will be the case, but I'm going to discuss Fayne early. That's because I have a review of Fayne on my channel already, and if you've already watched that review you will know that this is my favourite read all year. Fayne is a twisting, queer, historical fiction set in the Victorian era, very much in the style of Fingersmith, but I think it's much better than Fingersmith, and I really liked Fingersmith. Charlotte Bell is heir to Fayne, a contested area of the UK that is both and neither in England and Scotland. It only exists in so much that it is contested. Once the dispute is settled, it will be absorbed into either England or Scotland, and it will no longer have a lord. It is in between. It is both and neither. Charlotte Bell is a reference to the Brontes, who all used Bell as the last name in their pen name. Action Bell, Courier Bell, and Alice Bell. Fayne itself has this real Moorish Wuthering Heights type feel to it. It's almost magical. Charlotte has an eidetic memory and wants to become a doctor. She's clearly capable, but being young, she doesn't understand that her father is being hesitant. She doesn't understand that he doesn't want her to be educated. Charlotte's story is essentially a coming of age story. It's about the prejudices she faces as she becomes an adult, but there is also a mystery element to it. She is told that her mother is dead, and from an early age nobody would tell her much else. So being young and curious, she starts investigating, and this second timeline appears, and it's focusing on Charlotte's parents when they first met. When I think about the different ways a book can be enjoyed, plot, themes, characters, setting, writing, humour, this book does it all. It's fun, it's thought-provoking, and it's emotional. There are big feminist themes in this book, quite a lot of queer characters, and these are the obvious themes, but it also touches on class, on change and conformity, on belonging, on love, on loss, mental health and control, on being in between, on being both, on change, on identity. Very, very few books are able to fulfill the twists, turns and intrigue that is required for great commercial fiction, while being able to focus on the themes, characters and ideas required for great literary fiction. Very, very few books have this level of ambition, and even fewer pull it off. East of Eden, A Fine Balance, The Count of Monte Cristo. This book can brush shoulders with those books. Going through the remaining books from bottom to top, and it's Death Valley by Melissa Broder. Easily the worst Broder book I've read, but I think Broder superfans will actually enjoy this book. This is sort of an autofiction satire. A woman, we'll call her Melissa Broder, goes out into the Californian desert. Her father is dying. Her partner is sick. And she has a crush on the receptionists. Both receptionists. Apparently, the man is exactly her type and the woman is exactly her type. The lady has two types. Between being stressed out about the health of her loved ones and being horny about the sexy receptionists, who, by the way, are just doing their job. They're not even bending over or wearing tight clothing. It's a little bit objectifying. Melissa goes off into the desert where she finds the cactus of wisdom, crawls inside it and discovers herself. And look, this is all a piss take and I really admire Broder for that. It's very clear to me that we agree on the books that we hate. But there's only so much pretending to be Jack Kerouac having a shot at writing magical realism I can take, even with a tongue firmly planted in a cheek. And I think my real issue is it was never laugh out loud funny. It was whimsical, it was satirical, it was take the piss, but it didn't get so far as funny. I laughed at Milkfed, I laughed at the Pisces. I liked the characters in those books more. This one just didn't work for me, I'm sorry. The Unsettled by Ayana Mathis. 1985, Philadelphia, and Ava Carson has to take refuge in a shelter with her 10-year-old son, Toussaint. The food is barely good enough to eat, and the rooms are full of cockroaches. Ava grew up in Bonaparte, Alabama, but she left it years ago and hasn't told Duchess, her mum, about Toussaint. The path out of the shelter is pretty clear to Ava, but as Ava's situation is slowly revealed to us, we notice the problems that she has getting herself out of the rut. As Ava starts to fall deeper into a depression, Toussaint is ashamed of who he is, creating more trouble for Ava, in turn pushing her further into depression. The switching backwards and forwards between Ava and Duchess was kind of cool because it gave us a perspective of black city life and a perspective of black rural life. I really liked that while this was a story about race, it really actually wasn't. It was a tale about being poor, about domestic violence, about homelessness, stigma, shame, parenthood, knowing who your father is, the oppressive nature of charity, mental health, and the difference between city and rural lives. All of these issues exist within the black communities, but none of these issues are solely black issues, and neither is this how they're presented. And all of these themes are put together with the big themes of having a home and having a past, which again isn't a black issue, but all of these issues are more prevalent in black culture. What didn't I like about this book? The plot just felt a bit forced to me. This was one of those books where I really would have liked to continue thinking about it after I was reading it, and it was just a fine read. Dirty Laundry by Richard Pink and Roxanne Emery. Rich and Rox run a YouTube channel, ADHD Love, and I really like their channel. I started watching it when I first suspected I had ADHD, along with the channel How to ADHD, and I think that those channels are really complementary to each other. Dirty Laundry is essentially a non-fiction about ADHD, but it's not about the science behind it or anything like that. It's much more practical and empathetic. It's talking about common ADHD traits such as time blindness and what this means in a practical sense. People with ADHD are often late because they have unrealistic expectations about what they can achieve in 5 minutes, for example. This book then comes up with ways of dealing with that, both from the point of view of the person with ADHD and from the point of view of the partner. Rox has this iconic hair, and when I first found her channel, I remembered their channel simply by her brilliant haircut. Rox has ADHD, and I have always liked her better than Rich until this book. Rich is neurotypical, and it really comes across as a champion of a human in this book. I really like how Rich is so open about his emotions and his strugglings to deal with Rox having ADHD and how it affects his life, but also how he's so empathetic towards her and puts her first. He's just radically empathetic. This book is not just about people with ADHD running late, losing things, and forever rewashing laundry because it's been sitting in the washer for a day. And I mean, talk about calling me out. It also talks about the amazing things Rox can do because she has ADHD. You know, having ADHD means that you're really good at some things and other people are amazed at you. You're creative, empathetic, and curious, and you have the super ability that is hyperfocus. But things like keeping the place tidy and being on time, which other people think are basic adulting skills, are very difficult. And it's really empowering to learn about that and to look at it as two sides of a coin and to look at it as a whole condition. Because for me, like, I would love to be good at all the things that I am bad at because of ADHD, but I don't want to lose all the things that I am good at. I think that this is an excellent book for anybody who has ADHD or lives with somebody with ADHD. However, if you watch Rich and Rox's YouTube channel regularly, they cover everything in this book on their channel, and their channel is now covering new content that's not in this book, which means that reading it was a personal disappointment. Finally, I just want to say it has a fantastic blend of humor and useful information and personal vulnerability that makes both their book and their YouTube channel really easy to consume. The Waiting by Keum Gendry-Kim, translated by Janet Hong. This is a Korean graphic novel about a woman who enters the lottery to meet her child who has been living in North Korea, and her friend who enters the same lottery to see her sister. This is a real Berlin Wall style story, and while the Berlin Wall actually did come down, Korea is still two countries. This was really focused on family and relationship before the Korean War and relationship now, but also about how people got separated and just the realities of the Korean War from the Korean side of things. Not the military side, just the people living in the country at the time, trying to raise children, trying to eat a meal. It's details that our media doesn't present. And the thing that I think this book does a really fantastic job of is showing us how this divide was so sudden, how the people were running from various troops, how the Americans bombed them, and how confusing that was for them. I think often the choice between North Korea and South Korea gets presented with hindsight and Western bias. Of course you would pick South Korea now, but this book does a really great job of capturing that confusion of being caught up in a civil war and just running for your life in terror and looking for the food you need to get by and the desperate nature of this situation. That is something that I've not seen done in other books. I think it also gave us a really good insight into the lives of people in both countries now, and just the little bits of information we get out of North Korea and how we don't actually know how bad it is there, and the uncertainty they create by withholding so much information to the world, but also the little bits of information that does trickle out tells us so much, and that's present in this novel too. Koreans do seem to live to a very old age. At least that's the feeling I get from a lot of the novels I read. I'm not sure what the actual stats are, but that fact makes this graphic novel work really well. This is a sad novel about losing your family and the enduring hope we have of meeting them again, that they had a good life, that they are happy. And also, this is not a massive list of books for comparison, but this is one of the best graphic novels I've ever read. Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was a Victober read. I've said in the last few recent read videos I'm a little behind, so this can sort of show you exactly how far behind I am. Gaskell unfortunately died before she finished this novel, but it was very close to completion. And she was basically at the stage where she was summing up what happened to all the various characters. And she had notes. We know what happened. We're not filling in the gaps. We know what was going to happen. We just don't have her words or her extended words. This is a coming-of-age novel focused on Molly, but it's also a chunky Victorian novel. So it's not just one thing. It's got that marriage market and actual love Jane Austen-style themes running through it. And now that I've said it, I really hate the comparison between Gaskell and Austen. While they are doing a lot of similar things, they're providing social critique of the roles of women in particular, they write in very different styles. I much prefer the way Gaskell puts a sentence together and builds her characters. Although I do acknowledge that that is a completely personal preference and each to your own. There are a lot of themes about personal relationships within families in this book, and how when those families change through marriage, the family dynamic changes, the bonds that we have with people and the bonds of marriage versus blood, the way various family members try not to favour or indeed deliberately favour either Molly or Cynthia in this novel is really fascinating. I really love the relationship between Molly and Cynthia and the contrast of both characters. I think it's wonderful how Gaskell makes both of them so likeable in completely different ways. This really, for me, sums up why she's such a good writer, the character creation here. I was not expecting to like Cynthia before she arrived in the novel. I think it was quite smart foreshadowing. You know, she starts off in France. She's not in England with the other characters, and we only have reputation. It's one of the very clever ways Gaskell is critiquing society in setting up our expectations for Cynthia in one way and then showing us a character that meets those descriptions, but colouring in the details to show a completely different character and how wrong we were based on lazy stereotypes. That is wonderful. Another theme running through this novel is the concept of Englishness, of nationalism, and of prejudice. There is definitely a lot of French hating going on, and I think what Gaskell does with that is also brilliant. This really is a novel that you could read and reread and create one of those boards with strings all over it. I like this novel, but it's nowhere near the heights that was Mary Barton or North and South. The plot just needed a little bit more, I thought. Mother Country by Jacinta Townsend. Shannon is suffering under the weight of both student and medical debt. She's had a nasty car accident and that's left her face scarred. She's also unable to have children, and she meets a wealthy businessman, Vladimir, who takes her to Morocco and they fall in love. Surya has had a traumatic childhood complete with rape and being sold. She considers how she will escape Mauritania and move to Morocco. Surya's early life is full of human trafficking, and I don't know if anybody else knows, but Mauritania still has slavery today. Shannon's life is a mess. Her relationship with her mother is a mess, and she really doesn't have a future to look forward to. And she finds a wealthy but boring businessman. She sees this as an opportunity to have a good life. She doesn't tell him that she probably can't have children, and she's very mercenary about using him, marrying him, falling in love with him. Vladimir, meanwhile, has a kink for looking after people, for disabilities, for scars. And while we never get his point of view in this book, I really did start to think, does he think nobody else will be interested in Shannon because of the scar on his face? Does he view that as insurance, as an ability to keep her? Even if he does just like her for her, even if that vicious interpretation of his motives is not true, he does expect her to have babies and to raise children and to look after the house. Their marriage really is like a contract, like a business deal, but only one of them is aware of it. When in Morocco on one of Vladimir's business trips, Shannon notices an orphan girl in the market, one with a face that looks similar to Shannon's. Shannon calls her Mardi and takes her back to her hotel and convinces Vladimir to bribe some friends in high places, and bam, instant child. Both Shannon and Vladimir are aware that they don't spend enough time looking for Marty's parents. Surya has lost her daughter Yu on the streets of Morocco, having no other option but to let her play on the streets while she works so that they can eat at night. Unable to find her daughter or the woman with the scar on her face that brought her ice cream, she spirals into depression and must decide if she will move on with her life or end it. Despite the egregious amount of plot I have told you about in this book, there is so much I haven't told you about yet. This is complex and gritty and dark, and it leaves you asking the question, is you or Marty better off in poverty in Morocco or in luxury in the US, and why? How will her life be different in those situations? Do we as the West assume that our lives are better than the lives of people in the global South? This is an outstandingly powerful novel. I definitely recommend it. Everything that I'm about to say to be critical of it is nothing in comparison to the power of this novel. But if I can be critical of it, there is quite a lot of backstory, and I feel like Townsend rushes that. I would love her or her publisher or whoever made the choice to allow her to have 50 or 100 more pages to flesh out things like the relationship between Shannon and her mother, to spend more time on the really traumatic past that Soria had, or even build Vladimir a bit better as a character. It's missing details like that really take the air out of what would have otherwise been like top 10 books I've read in 2024. Instead, this will just go down as a good 4-star read, one that I still really heartily recommend, but one that I'm a little bit frustrated at, not because it was bad, but because I could see how this novel could be absolutely mind-blowingly amazing. And we're just left with a really solid good book. Penance by Eliza Clark. It's been nearly a decade since 16-year-old Joan Wilson was murdered. We follow Ali, a journalist trying to get a definitive account of what happened, which include, among other things, interviews with the murderers themselves, interviews with Joan's classmates. This is essentially a fictionalized true crime novel, although it does share quite a bit in common with the Shanda Shara murder. Although she has moved the location to Yorkshire, she's changed the names and the ages of everybody. Let's start with a little bit of a warning here. There aren't many gruesome scenes in this novel, but the scenes that are gruesome are very gruesome. A book that, while it is fantastic, is certainly not for everybody. Even if it is for you, you probably want to be in the right frame of mind for this. This is definitely a book that, if you are delicate, that you should just skip. This is a really intelligent book, and I really admire Clark's ambition. The setup, the way we have an unreliable narrator interviewing people who are very clearly not impartial. There is something very Wuthering Heights-esque with that multiple level of unreliable narrators. I think doing it with the combination of high school bullying and this sort of cruel female friendship themes as well, and internet culture, fandoms and toxic online behaviour, all that made it even better. All of this is just so staggeringly ambitious because as a reader, it could have got really confusing, and Clark has nothing but my respect for making a novel like this work. The themes around xenophobia, not only did I think that this really captured a type of community and a type of attitude, it also really fits well into with this story. You can see the similarities between the behaviour of the children that ultimately commit this crime and of the adults of the community. There is a lot of classism going on as well. You can see the breeding of these attitudes within this society. It's frightening. These girls are starting to talk about famous killers and things like the Columbine shooting. It's so creepily wholesome how they start loving up these monsters. It's like kids these days, they either like Taylor Swift, Mbappe, or Charles Manson. I just can't help but to look at the similarities between the feelings they have for the adults in their life and the confusing nature of being a teenager, of testing the limits, of figuring things out, of trying to shock adults. And all of this works to create the perfect breeding ground, the perfect way to transform these normal girls into the little murderesses, into the selfish socialite sociopaths that they are. Probably this is not my ideal style of book. Not that I didn't like it, I really did. But it's my first time reading Eliza Clark, and I think I've left a much bigger fan of her than I have of this novel. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what she writes next and to catching up and reading boy parts soon. Evil Eye, Etaf Rum. This is a book that I think has women's prize stamped all over it. I would be very unsurprised to see this book on the long list next year. Yara has married an entrepreneur in an arranged marriage. He believes he's being very liberal and understanding. He's allowing her to get an arts degree and land a job at a local college where she combines admin tasks like making the website with teaching. She can only do it part-time as she also has to do the school run and clean and make these wonderful traditional Lebanese dishes. Etaf Rum, if you're watching this review, please write a cookbook. The Lebanese food you described is amazing. Regardless of whether you like this book or not, if you like Lebanese food, read this book, you'll get hungry. Anyway, we have these feminist themes and looking at this traditional Lebanese arranged marriage, but there's also Yara's parents' relationship, and Yara is having a lot of flashbacks, which is where the title Evil Eye comes from. Yara and her mother are in quite similar situations, but with very different husbands. And like a lot of good literary fiction, it's the contrasts and the similarities that make the book. Yara wants to travel. There is a chance to go to Norway with her job, and her husband denies her, saying it's not a good time for him. This sort of becomes an ongoing theme. Yara really wants to travel, but she is constantly denied that chance. And what seems like a really very reasonable negotiation becomes an ongoing sacrifice she has to make. It is the summation of little things. And I think travel is one of those things like babies. Ask about it on the first date, and if you disagree, thanks for the lovely time, but it's not going to work. Of course, that wasn't an option for Yara. Yara is also the victim of what I am going to call casual office racism. And she calls it out, and that ends her up in a bit of trouble. Yara's husband tries to empathize with her by saying, "It's okay if you lose a job, you don't need to work, be a stay-at-home wife." For Yara, it's not about the money, but having something for herself, and he just doesn't understand that. I think what happens at Yara's work is really super realistic too. It happens in workplaces every day. It's so ridiculously common. This all leads Yara to get counselling, which is actually a really good thing for her, even if it does come about in such a horrible way. And it also leads to her making friends with one of the men at her work. He very much becomes her best friend, which adds the themes of mental health, but also of friendship and the importance of having your own friends and of counselling. I think that this is a really good novel. I feel like I intimately know Yara after this book. I see how she both loves and is repressed by her culture. Obviously, we have the themes of feminism, racism, mental health, office politics, and there's a lot of familial relationship, there's domestic violence. But I think this book is really about what we need as humans and learning to put yourself first, especially in a world that is constantly telling you that your needs are not at the top of the list. The Poet by Louisa Reid. Louisa Reid is a YA author, but this is her debut as an adult novel, and she simply needs to write more novels like this. If you love Jessica Andrews, pick up this book. And that is not a comparison I make lightly, even though Jessica Andrews is an undersung author. She is one of my absolute favourites, and Louisa Reid is doing something similar. Emma is a young, confident poetry student. She is in a toxic relationship with Tom, her former professor. Tom is charismatic. He's idolized by his students. He's intelligent and upwardly mobile. Emma wants to get her work out there to make something of herself, but what initially looks like Tom's help slowly becomes clear that it's something much more sinister. It slowly starts to erode Emma's confidence. He becomes controlling. He makes her do tasks that he avoids, babysitting his children from a prior marriage while he works late and avoids his daughter. But all of this isn't the end point of the novel, because as Emma is pushed to the breaking point and struggles with her mental health, she starts to realize what's happening. Because this novel is told in verse, Reid is really able to bring the mood of the scene into this novel with her writing. This is an absolutely outstanding novel. I really feel for Emma. The language and the characters are first class, but also the plot. The plot in this, you don't expect this type of novel to bother with a plot, but it really is the icing on the cake, and it really is so amazing. I'm not going to tell you about it. You're going to have to read it. This is a sad girl novel with beautiful writing, with beautiful characters, and with a kick-ass plot. Give me the confidence of a mediocre white man who thinks he has the right to a woman's work, her words, and her womb, and everything else. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye bye.